Hey everybody, welcome back to the 6 round post-fight show with me, Zane Simon, and my, no co-host, once again, myself, as always. Eddie apparently says he has to study for finals, and, whatever, to cover. We all know. He's off acting as the replacement Jorge Masvidal for some public event or something. Anyway, I'm here coming to y'all just after the end of UFC 310 going down at the T-Mobile Arena in Paradise, Nevada. And a weird night of fights, honestly. Like this was warmed up to be a pretty great card on paper. If you listen to the Vivi this week, we talked it up. We were like, man, I know the flyweights, nobody likes them. This title fight was not put together in a way to make anybody excited about it. The card wasn't going to get any viewers or any interest, but we actually liked the card all up and down, well booked. Even the fights like Eric Anders, Chris Weidman, it's a terrible fight. It's at least a terrible fight that, like, okay, I can excuse it. There weren't any fights that I really felt awful about seeing on it or whatever. And the main event was kind of exactly what I expected, which was a showcase for Pantoja against a fighter who has really spent almost none of his career fighting in a cage and hasn't spent his career fighting in the UFC style of MMA, the high output, high volume cage wrestling style of MMA. So I was really pretty happy to see Asakura come out there and have a few big flashes, get a couple of things done, and make the fight interesting. And then for Pantoja to wrap it up early and not make this a big grind. The rest of the main card, though, as one of my listeners here is noting, kind of stunk it up, except for the main event and the Choi fight. There was cool stuff in there. Bryce Mitchell slamming Kron Gracie, Ian Gary almost submitting Shavkat Rakhmonov on nobody's bingo card out there. But in general, I'll get into all the fights individually later, but it has to be said that Rakhmonov gone, Mitchell not that impressive, and in Gon's case, just bad in fights that they won. And in the case of Rakhmonov and Gon, these were fights that they won that were supposed to propel them to title shots potentially, where it really has to be said, like, security didn't even know who Bilal Muhammad was when they're waving him into the cage, and Shavkat's like, yeah, bring the champion. I want to face with the champ. The security's like, okay, who's that guy? That's the champ. Are you sure? They got to check with Dana White 2 or 3 times to make sure that he's actually going to let this guy in the cage to face off with Shavkat. That's not a great sign for your future promotion of a title fight between them. That is absolutely a moment where you're going to need to put another bigger fight over the top of that. But and then for Gon, yeah, that fight with Volkov, I'll talk about it, like I said, more later, but I cannot imagine Cyril Gane fighting for a title after that fight. That was terrible. All right. First off, though, Alexandre Pantoja, Kai Asakura said going in. Basically, I feel like Asakura got he was the benefit of UFC spite, and Pantoja got the punishment. I mean, you could say, okay, headlining a pay-per-view isn't a punishment, but it probably is not this probably is not a pay-per-view where his points are going to even kick in. So this will have effectively been paid like a fight night for Pantoja. Maybe there's an extra bonus. No, there's a bonus for headlining cards. Maybe there's an extra bonus for headlining a pay-per-view card built into his contract. I would hope so. But I would have trouble imagining that if he even gets points, because flyweights obviously have had to fight pretty hard to get pay-per-view points in the past. If he even gets points, I don't think this is the level of pay-per-view sales where they're really going to kick in. So he gets kind of hard done by getting an opponent nobody knows and on a pay-per-view that nobody's going to watch. And Asakura is the one who, he gets to walk in and get the benefit of an immediate title shot, an immediate payday, which apparently I didn't realize, and y'all can tell me I'm an idiot for this or whatever later. But in our live chat that I run over on my Substack, check it out. It's free. It's fun. We've had how many comments this time around? We had 1,500 comments tonight over the course of the pay-per-view. We're, cutting it up, having a good time. It's fun stuff. But one of our readers one of the folks over there who lives in Korea and has lived in Japan in the past, Rich, if you're listening to this, that's you, saying that Asakura makes like $35 million a year in social media, advertising, merchandising, all that shit. Like, I heard going into this fight that they were like, oh yeah, he and his brother Mikaru are like the Japanese Paul brothers. And I was like, okay, but like not making that kind of money, so whatever, I get it, but that doesn't seem. But apparently they are, really, which also I think explains why Asakura got an instant title shot, because he probably walked in and could walk in with a bargaining position with the UFC saying, look, you've got to pay me. You've got to be paying me top dollar. I have a title already. You need to be paying me like a top star in your organization, which is why, when the UFC tends to do that, they tend to make those fighters prove it right away. So Asakura, he gets a title shot, well-deserved. Pantoja gets saddled with a pay-per-view nobody watched, not well-deserved at all. But anyway, that all said, this could not have gone any better for Pantoja if that is the burden he's going to be saddled with. He looked like the champion. He looked like the fighter that he had been on the rise. Like, it's really, it's kind of sucked to see Pantoja's title run, not because I don't like Pantoja. I like him a lot, but because the Moreno, Royval, Ursig fights, they have not been fun Pantoja fights. They have been grinding, ugly Pantoja fights. And, like, this is a dude who has been known for, like, absolutely wild back and forth, scrambling, power punching, insane fights who, like, you go back and you look through the first, 5 or 10 years of Pantoja's career, and he had 6 decisions as a flyweight fighter. 6 decisions in 10 years in 20 fights. He was a thrilling fighter. And this was a chance to get to see that version of Pantoja again. He hit Asakura with a lot of big shots, walked into and took some big shots, got another reminder of what an insane chin he has. Like I said, we got to see the key Asakura moments. We got to see the flying knee. We got to see the huge counters. And we got to see Pantoja eat all those. And then we got to see that awesome trip he hit to that teleportation back take that ended up finishing the fight with the rear naked choke. Just absolutely core, definitive Alexandre Pantoja goodness. The stuff that he really made his career out of before winning the title. So I enjoyed that. It was great to see that. And it's great to see him make the best of, like I say, what I think is kind of a hard luck situation. If Asakura had gone out there and just iced Pantoja and put him away, it would be like, man, Pantoja got his reputation tainted as a boring champ, and then he got killed on a fight that nobody watched. So I was really glad that didn't happen. And, I doubt that this fight will hurt Asakura's stock at all. I think he'll probably, if he's not headlining a fight night card in his next fight, he'll at least be on the main card, taking on another top-ranked flyweight. I saw somebody recommend the idea of Asakura versus Royval. I think that would be a fantastic fight. Or you could do, because people are talking like, they even talked about it in the booth, talked about it post-fight. They're like, oh yeah, well, is Royval next for him? And it's just like, DC, God love him, was like, he's already beat him twice. Like, he doesn't need to fight Brandon Royval again. If I were Pantoja, I absolutely would not take a third Brandon Royval fight. Who cares that he beat Tatsuro Taira by, split decision? So, I think you could do Asakura Royval, make Royval jump through another hoop to win it. You could do Asakura Moreno. You could do Asakura France. That would be awesome. Although, honestly, they might do Kai Kara France. They might give him the next title shot. As somebody else is noting here, we need the mouse. After his win, Pantoja called out Demetrius Johnson, which does just show you how dire the flyweight title picture is right now. Pantoja, and this is a problem. I don't know. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here and go off on a tangent, but it's just the way my brain works. The UFC now these days, they don't cut anyone. They keep everyone around as long as possible, which is good for fighters. I don't have a big problem with it in theory. Guys like Tim Elliott are always fun to watch. They deserve to be around. Keep Tim Elliott around. And the result of doing that kind of thing is that sometimes fighters like Pantoja, who, he had a run where he lost to Ortiz and Figueiredo and Askarov a few years ago, and it kind of seemed like, okay, well, Pantoja's not going to be a contender. And then Pantoja gets to stick around, and he wins a bunch of fights, and now he's champion. But because he's been around so long, he's fought so many contenders that there's not really an obvious title fight for him right now. And that kind of sucks. So, yeah, somebody else noting, doesn't need to be bad. They rejected an offer from Kyoji Horiguchi, which sucks. They should absolutely bring Kyoji Horiguchi back. Horiguchi versus Pantoja would be another awesome title fight to put together right at this moment. But if they do Kara France Pantoja or something like that, I will, I'll be for it. That's a fight that Pantoja hasn't had before, and Kara France is always fun. They're not going to bring Mokaev back. So anyway. Otherwise, yeah, this was just good to see Pantoja back to form, and Asakura, there are plenty of fights for him in the top of that division. He'll be in something fun. So I got no problem with the main event. It was a quick fight, a cool fight, the right fight to make given the circumstances. I just wish that it had had a bigger fight over the top of it so that more people would have wanted to tune in and see Pantoja look good. It's kind of my only real regret for that. That brings us, though, to the welterweight co-main event. Shavkat Rakhmonov, Ian Gary, and So there are a couple kinds of sparring partner fights that you can see out there. And I mean, these two weren't sparring partners for that long. Ian Gary was at, he was only at Killcliff for a couple of years. So I don't know how much that even, well, I mean, it crossed over with Shavkat for a lot of that time. So maybe they did train together a lot. But there are a couple of kinds of training partner fights you see out there. One is when the training partners are friends and they just don't want to fight each other. Two is when there is just an obvious dynamic that has happened every time they train together. And it doesn't matter what they are used to doing in the cage or who's on the better run or whatever. They're two guys that train together and one of them always wins in training, and that's just how the fight's going to go. And three, you get guys that fight like they're training and they're so used to sparring one another that they just kind of go out and spar one another. And I kind of can't help think maybe just a little bit this was two sparring partners used to sparring each other. There's also, there are talks of injuries. Shavkat talked about how he was injured going in. There was some talk during the fight that maybe he broke his hand. And I do believe, because this is a fight that, somebody else mentioned, this fight made both fighters look worse. People were talking like, oh, well, I might have to pick Bilal Muhammad over Shavkat now. And I still am picking Shavkat over Muhammad. And I do think that the long boy versus long boy, as designated member here put it, is kind of to blame. That Shavkat's game is all about the clinch. That is his path to wrestling. Cormier was talking about it. I was like, oh, the problem is he's going for all these upper body wrestling takedowns. Those are easier to defend, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, yeah, but that is how Shavkat wrestles. His wrestling game always goes through the clinch. It is a clinch wrestling game. It's where he operates best. And trying to out-clinch a tall fighter is just hard. And we saw later when Rachmanov took the opportunity to hit some reactive shots and took some risks on actually shooting in on Gary, he got Gary down, and it wasn't that hard, but he had to break from his normal game to do that. That isn't the kind of guy that isn't the kind of wrestling game that Shavkat likes to employ. So I'm not really surprised this fight ended up being stalled out and ugly. I am surprised that Ian Gary almost got a submission. I mean, how almost you want to get about that, I don't know, but he got on his back, got the rear naked choke sunk in. He was talking before, like, okay, Shavkat beat me up in grappling when we trained together, but I'm better now. I've trained. I've got a lot more experience on the mat with a better camp for it. And so credit to him. He got out there and did it. The reason that I still have to pick Shavkat over Muhammad, as smart as Muhammad fights, is I cannot help but think about those moments in Muhammad's fight with Leon Edwards, where Leon Edwards would occasionally wake up from whatever stupor he always seems to be in whenever he feels like he's winning and shouldn't have to fight that hard or doesn't want to. Whenever he would snap out of that and remember that he needed to actually do something to win, he could take Bilal down really easily and start beating him up really easily. And he busted Bilal's face up instantly off of one takedown. And I cannot help thinking about that with Shavkat and think that Shavkat's game and his size and Bilal's game, which is added. I mean, he can be a back foot guy who skirts away and makes somebody chase him and takes advantage of that. But the best versions of Bilal we've seen lately are versions of him that press forward and out wrestle people. And he's not a dangerous striker on the back foot. And I'm just not picking it over Shavkat. Maybe he can shock me, but I still got to pick Shavkat in that eventual fight. So, as for Gary, there are a couple glaring holes here. I mean, we got to talk about, for Gary, like one of the big things that has always been a concern to me was one of the reason I didn't pick Gary here and wasn't really willing to is his retreating footwork is bad. And it has always been bad. Getting trapped on the fence for Gary has gotten him hit a lot. It makes him trip over his own feet a lot. He gets that thing where he is suddenly got his arms out to keep himself from falling as he skirts the fence. And Jeff Neal had no problems clinching him up all throughout their fight. And it's just like, well, if Jeff Neal can do it, Shavkat Rakhmonov can do it. Clinching is all Rakhmonov wants to do. He's going to do it. So I had to assume that would be a big problem right away. The other thing that has to be said, somebody asking here, what happened to Gary's output? I have felt for a long time that Gary he's a very good athlete. He's clearly, he's not incapable of competing against elite level talent, but he is not an athlete who can clearly separate himself from the elite with his physical tools. And that was really kind of apparent to me in his fight with MVP. And like Michael Venom Page he's a huge problem as a striker. He's awkward. He's difficult to deal with. But if your whole game is built around being an elite distance striker, I am not convinced that Page should have been the point that just turns you into a no questions, cannot do anything else but wrestler. I just don't think that I don't think Gary can so easily separate himself as an elite striker from the rest of the crowd at welterweight. And that's what we saw against Shavkat here, is that when Shavkat pushed forward, he could take advantage of Gary's defense on the back foot. He could do it well enough that Gary didn't really trust himself to push forward that well. And at that point, there are other, elite welterweights who are going to pose that kind of problem to Gary. So I just am not convinced that Gary is enough of a singularly talented offensive fighter to take over that division and be a clear level above somebody like Rakhmonov. And, I was just talking about the UFC with their keeping people around and people having a lot of time and ability to make things happen. I would still say that Gary's in the running, that he could be champ someday, because he's I know he's not like so young that he's still a child, but I mean, he's 27. Like in the next 6 years, he could win a title. So I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility, but okay, this question here, would I pick Prates to beat Gary? I might, because I'm a huge mark for Carlos Prates. Prates' game doesn't have a lot of feints or like deception to it, though. And Neil Magny was able to give Prates a few fits just by pushing forward really quickly and forcing Prates to be reactive and in a reactive mode early. In my heart of hearts, right now, I would probably guess that Gary would win that fight, but I really would want Prates to win it. I'd love him to just show up and, find the one weird gap and find the fact that, like, Gary is really, it is slander for somebody to say that I like the fighting nerds. No, I like Carlos. Carlos Prates this hurts my soul so much because would I pick Colby to beat Ian Gary? Absolutely not. No, not this version of Colby. Colby is too washed, too trigger shy. I would not pick Colby at all. But I would love to see Prates just realize that Gary has huge problems with backing up to the cage and losing his footwork, and just put Gary on the back foot and show the same kind of striking length that MVP pulled off and force Gary into an ugly wrestling fight. But all right. I don't think, did Shavkat hook the glove to survive the rear naked choke? I don't think so. I didn't see it. And if he did and the ref didn't see it, then good credit to him. Okay, somebody asked, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I will get to the Topuria Evloev question when I get to Topuria Evloev, because I got to talk about that fight in its own time. Anyway, Ian Gary, he could easily fight. I would honestly love to see him fight Leon Edwards. Really, especially with the bad blood they had over Edwards not liking Ian Gary at his camp. And I know that Colby Covington, I know Colby Covington is not going to fight him. I think if you're Ian Gary, the fight he's probably going to target is Gilbert Burns or Stephen Thompson, because those are fights that he will feel like he can win, and that's kind of what he's been doing his whole career, is picking and finding fights that look good on his record and are good competitive steps up, but are very winnable. That said, he took this fight against Shavkat on short notice, which I have a huge amount of respect for. But anyway, somebody's mentioning DJ just tweeted he got offered $2 million to fight possibly by the UFC. If the UFC is pulling up $2 million for Demetrius Johnson, A, good for them. B, I cannot possibly think that is true, but I'd love to see it if it happened. All right. That brings us to the wildest disappointment of the evening. A heavyweight fight, Cyril Gane, Alexander Volkov. And this was an absolute robbery. I'm sorry. I can see an argument that Gane might have won a round, maybe the second. I want to say, although he unanimously got the first, and I really did not think that was a good round for him at all. He dropping for that heel hook was just a tragic comic mistake. Yeah, as noted, Gane was unimpressed with his own performance. He left the octagon with his corner. They all thought he lost, and going back in, it was clear to him that he felt he deserved to lose. I don't know if you all have seen that fight that Rampage had with Murillo Ninja Hua back in Pride, where they gave him the big ass trophy, and he tried to hand it to Ninja after the fight. And he was just like, this was when Rampage's brief Christian period, where he had like the big cross necklace and grew his hair out into an afro. The strangest era of Rampage. But Cyril Gane, I have felt for a while like I've never been particularly impressed with Fight Factory as a camp, but I felt like for a while they're a pretty fine camp. A lot of their fighters that come out of there, whether it's been Imavov or Ngannou or Gane or who's the bantamweight? I'm forgetting his name right now. But damn it. Anyway, a lot of their fighters that have come out, they all seem to be fine, reasonably well-rounded, not necessarily really technically deep everywhere. Taylor Lapilus, there it is. Yeah. Taylor Lapilus, Gomes, they all seem to be pretty like, okay, they have a game that's well enough constructed to win fights. And it makes enough sense. It's not, we're not talking Sikjitsu. We're not talking Caesar Gracie. We're not talking SBG Ireland levels of tragedy camps where you see fighters go there and you're just like, okay, what are you learning? Why would anybody teach you this? But man, it is so clear in the long run that the jiu-jitsu that they are teaching at that camp is complete MMA pilled gimmick jiu-jitsu. It is surprise attack jiu-jitsu. And that's the kind of thing that works at really low-level regional MMA, where you're just like, oh, well, I'm going to drop for a heel hook, and somebody's like, oh, my God, I never would have expected that. I'm tapping as fast. But at this level, even heavyweights who don't grapple, nobody's getting fooled by Cyril Gane's heel hook. Nobody is getting tapped out by a Kimura from guard by Cyril Gane. Nobody, he's just... And he did that in every single round. He had a mistake, a grappling error that was just tragically bad and should have given away the round. And Volkov, he was catching Gane's kicks and tipping him to the mat early. He seemed like he was shocking Gane from range, hitting him with those teeps to the body, getting on the jab first. Gane's jab was just totally absent in this fight. And I couldn't in good conscience give Gane any of those rounds at all. I don't care if you want to say, oh, he had submission attempts. They were terrible submission attempts. They're not the kind of submission attempts that a judge should reward. That is bad attacking offense that puts you in a worse position to win the fight. That should not be rewarded by judges. And it is amazing to me that it was. Volkov, I'm seeing somebody say, they're ugly rounds to score, all that. Sure, but the first two rounds are rounds where you could say, okay, maybe they could go either way. But I would, in each of those cases, I would say it should tip in the case of Volkov. And yeah, that's the other thing, is that Volkov having the clear round in a fight where you have two rounds that could tip either way and one clear round that goes one way. In those kinds of fights, the fighter who gets the clear round almost always wins the fight, and almost always should. And in this case, I would just argue that the first two rounds, if you're scoring well, they should lean Volkov. Maybe not be definitive, but lean that way. And for two judges to give Gane this fight, he's right to think he didn't win it. It's a robbery. It's maybe not the levels of Jessica or of Pena versus Pennington, rather, that stole a title away levels of robbery, but it is a robbery. So, terrible fight. And yeah, I can't imagine how you give Gane I mean, the UFC have to see this and they have to go into overdrive. If you're John Jones and if you're Tom Aspinall, you are thanking the heavens for Cyril Gane in this fight, because the UFC has to turn around and look at this and say, okay, now we really need to make Jones versus Aspinall. I don't care how much money they want. I don't care how much money it takes. We are not putting together Cyril Gane versus Tom Aspinall for a title fight. It's terrible. Nobody wants to see it. Nobody's going to care. So, big win for Jones and Aspinall. terrible fight for Cyril Gane. They should make him fight this Volkov fight over again. Honestly, rebook this fight, do it again. Volkov deserves another chance. Otherwise, yeah, do Gane Almeida. Somebody mentioning punish Gane with Curtis Blades and Gelton Almeida. Do Gane Almeida. That's the thing. And yes, also as noted, it is especially frustrating because Gane had exactly the right answer to beat Volkov the first time. Low kicks, stick on your jab. He's twice, when he would throw, it was clear he's twice as fast as Volkov. Even Volkov, in looking like he's in good shape and had a good game plan, is still slower than Gane. He just had the initiative. He knew what he wanted to do. Gane had no clue what he wanted to do. And this is a moment where now I have to look at that. Like I said, I have to look at that Fight Factory camp and be like, are you guys just making fighters worse? Because now this feels like it. You had the answer. It was right there. You did this fight once already. He did say he broke his toes immediately in the first round, so on the first kick. So maybe that changed everything. But honestly, anyway. Yeah, this felt like a terrible performance from Gane all over, and I have to think he knows it. He looked really unhappy about it. I say run the fight back. If you don't, then do Gane Almeida and do Volkov versus... you know what? Volkov deserves a chance to fight Curtis Blades again. That's a fight he could get back because he didn't actually... He got taken down a bunch that first time, but he was coming back by the end of that fight. And if he's got a fire lit under him now, I really think he was going through some struggles, some confidence struggles just a few years ago. If he's got a fire lit under him now, then that's a fight I'd be happy to see him have again. All right. That brings us to a featherweight bout. Bryce Mitchell, Kron Gracie, a shockingly restrained post-fight Bryce Mitchell apologizing to Joe Rogan, espousing totally normal beliefs in Christianity that are fine and just as whatever as everybody else. But yeah, just two of the most insane, not crazy aggressive, but just insane mentally jiu-jitsu grapplers in the UFC. And really, Cesar Gracie Jiu-Jitsu has to be way up there for worst camps in MMA. I always forget it. I always forget about the... okay, somebody asked me what I think about the Gracie family as a whole. I have interviewed Hoist before, and he was very polite and nice and all that. I'm not going to totally slander them for their whole, classic Brazilian fascists thing, whatever. But they are a family that is very into a lot of their branches, their splits, obviously, because, Roger Gracie and even Kron Gracie have been very good international competitive grapplers. But there is a channel running through that family that is very allergic to progress in grappling and for treating jiu-jitsu as something that can evolve. They are very conservative in the traditional meaning of the word traditional. Somebody asking why they are still pulling guard, and Kron is out there. He does the Gracie stomp still. He does the Gracie strike. He believes as a fighter, because he tried to do go out and do his own thing with the striking against Cub Swanson and all that, and everybody was like, dude, what the hell are you doing? This is terrible. And I think it pushed him right back into, okay, I need to do the traditional Gracie thing. I also think he's just crazy. He seems like a guy who he lives in his own world. It seems like, I don't know that he is cued in on anything going on outside. And like, does he watch any MMA outside of training? Does he watch any of his opponents fight or anything like that? I have no idea. He doesn't fight like it. I know I'm ranting and just talking out my ass here, but you got to look at the results. And who pulls like, even in the world of guard pullers, who pulls guard like they're jumping into dad's arms when he got home from Nam? Like, the dude pulled guard on Bryce Mitchell like he was a dog that had escaped its yard and was being reunited with its owner for the first time in 8 months. That was his style of guard pulling. And I can only commend Bryce Mitchell for it. On the 4th or 5th time Gracie did it, realizing just put the arm in the neck and slam him as hard as you can. And that was all it took. There were some follow-up shots, and that, Gracie was done. I have always actually felt that Bryce Mitchell, despite his insanity and all of his weird conspiracy pill nonsense, I've always felt that he's actually a fighter who learns really well in the cage and figures things out really well. So good on him for figuring out he's jumping literally into my arms and letting me hold him like a 90s sex scene up against the wall. And I should just put my forearm in his face and slam him. Anyway. Yeah. Bryce Mitchell did get a call out further down the card from who was it that called Bryce? From Duho Choi. So that would be a fun fight. If you're Bryce Mitchell, I don't really see why you would ever take that fight. Duho Choi isn't even ranked in your division, and Mitchell is still a ranked featherweight, but I would love to see it. Otherwise, you could do something like Bryce Mitchell, Lerone Murphy, or that's actually really it. You do Bryce Mitchell, Lerone Murphy, or you see Bryce Mitchell take the Duho Choi fight. I don't know. I don't like matching guys up from the same card, but it was a fun call out, so better that than nothing. I'm trying to see, is there any long time other guy in that division that just is coming off a win and would make good sense right now? Suppose you could do like Mitchell versus Wood, or Mitchell versus. Well, if Steve Garcia beats Edson Barboza, totally do Mitchell versus Steve Garcia. All right. I would hope Kron gets cut. Somebody asking if Kron Gracie gets cut. I don't like to wish that on anybody, but it is clear that his MMA is 25 years out of date, and I can't imagine why the UFC would ever want to promote that. Like, it doesn't make sense. He's not a competitive fighter in the current UFC. If they want to keep him around for gimmick fights, somebody asking about Ryan Hall, if he's still coming back. The last I saw from Ryan Hall was that he got injured really bad. I don't know if he has a comeback plan for that. I have not seen it, but you could do something like Ryan Hall, Kron Gracie. That would be fun, but Kron Gracie at this point is pure gimmick material. And the UFC is not tended to be a gimmick promotion. Sometimes they should be, but it's not what they're good at. So I would say they should just let him go fight back and send him back to Ryzen. He's perfect for that. All right. That brings us to a featherweight bout. Duho Choi, Nate Landwehr, and even counting the early knockout machine Doo-Ho Choi is 20, 11, 12, 13, knockout of Sam Sicilia, knockout of Thiago Tavares, even counting that version of Doo-Ho Choi. Doo-Ho Choi has never looked better than he did against Nate Landwehr here. This is the version of Doo-Ho Choi that we were all hoping for when he came up originally in the UFC as this super prospect. And yeah, I picked against him in this fight. Somebody noting Doo-Ho Choi looked like he got his confidence back. I made two stupid picks going in. Said, I'm not picking Doo-Ho Choi and I'm not picking Dominic Reyes because I don't actually believe that them just getting one win means they got their confidence back. And of course, Anthony Smith, I should have realized how shook up he was. I didn't really see that until after I made my pick. And I wasn't going to back off of it then because I'm no coward. But Doo-Ho Choi and Reyes both looked like they were the confident fighters they were supposed to be. And I think this is exactly the fight that they both needed to bring them back to the fighter that they could be and should be. Choi especially, he looked so technical and slick out there. And one of the big problems that Choi has always had in his career is that he could not stop himself from brawling. That was one of the big problems one of the reasons that especially I picked Landwehr over him, much more confidently than the Smith pick was practically a joke pick. I'll admit that. But I picked Landwehr much more confidently over Choi because Choi has never in his life been able to refuse a war. And Landwehr wins a lot of wars. And Choi, what he showed here was not just some pivoting and some body work and some head movement and things like that, but the ability to just, whenever Landwehr started flurrying forward and trying to build some momentum, Choi would just hit a slick takedown and stop his momentum dead. He stopped the war. He stopped the brawl. He stopped himself from getting drawn into a stupid fight when he's already winning a fight. The thing with winning a fight is it should force your opponent into mistakes that let you keep winning. And that was what this looked like, is that he was using the success he had against Landwehr to force Landwehr into desperation. And when your opponent is desperate, they should be giving you things you can use. And Landwehr gave Choi everything he needed to control this fight, keep it in front of him. Amazing win, fantastic fight from Doo-Ho Choi. Love it. Like I say, if I'm Doo-Ho Choi, that Bryce Mitchell call out, that was great. If I'm Mitchell, I don't accept that fight because that's a terrible fight for him. But you could do Choi Murphy. You could do Choi versus, Chikadze's coming off a loss, but I'd love to see Choi versus Chikadze. I'd love to see Choi versus Ige. Any fight in that top 15. In the top 10 to 15, I would love to see Doo-Ho Choi in right now. So get him up there. He's ready. He's been in this game forever. He's in his early 30s now. This is clearly his prime. Let the man make a run. All right. That brings us to a light heavyweight bout, Dominic Reyes, Anthony Smith. I already kind of talked about this, and I know I like to hate on Joe Rogan as a commentator. The UFC should never get rid of him because he's the most popular celebrity that they have ever had and can ever be associated with outside of Conor McGregor. As much as I hate to admit that, but he's a terrible commentator at this point. But I have no blame to give Rogan here for interviewing Anthony Smith after this fight and pushing him on retirement and I feel for Anthony Smith, losing somebody you love, losing somebody you're close to, losing a friend and a coach, especially. We've seen fighters who lose coaches and it absolutely wrecks them multiple fighters in the sport that we can talk about, whether it's Robert Follis and his team or Sean Tompkins and his team. And it can just be devastating. So I have nothing but sympathy for Anthony Smith. But if you can't go and perform without living in the grief that brings, like, that is a perfect reason not to be doing this anymore. Anthony Smith, he's overwhelmed by grief. He is in no fit emotional state at all to be fighting. And at his point in his career, with the amount of grief he is feeling, by the time he is in a place where he could maybe feel like he can come back, the game may have just have passed him by entirely. So I hope that he takes that push that Rogan gave him to heart. I hope that fans, and I hope that training partners, and I hope that other coaches that work with him do not push him away from it. I hope his family talks to him about this, because if you cannot, Reyes, I think in the his post-fight scrum was talking about Smith was telling him to punch him so that he could feel something. I don't know if that was a joke somebody was telling me, because it sounds like a joke. But if it's not, that's just, you can't be doing this, man. You can't be doing this anymore. That is the best reason, honestly, that anybody has to retire. Being too emotionally overwhelmed is that's a perfect reason not to compete anymore. So I hope this sticks with Smith. As for Reyes, then, yeah, I think, this is a great confidence builder for Reyes. He still takes too much damage. I still don't think his camp is very good. I don't think he's used his losses to learn anything new, but he's big and strong and fast enough and has a well-rounded enough game that, he's 3 fights right now from being back in title contention. And he could win 3 fights in the light heavyweight division. Somebody saying it here, one realistic option for Reyes, and that's Olberg. I would be happy to see Olberg. I honestly also think that there are a couple other realistic options too for him. And that would be Krylov. If Krylov can come back anytime soon. I know he was injured and out of his fight with Azamat Murzakanov. You could also do him versus Murzakanov. You could do Krylov, Reyes, and you could do Murzakanov, and I think you could also do Olberg. Olberg is a good option. So anyway, those are all really good fights and really good options for Dominic Reyes right now. They make a lot of sense. They would put him, they would all be a step forward, right back up towards contention. And he looked like this looked like the right fight where he came in confident and nothing about this fight dissuaded his confidence. And that's just, fighters need that. The UFC is really bad at, and MMA management is really bad in general, providing fighters with the idea of okay, if you had some really hard losses, you should actually try and rebuild. You should actually fight people that you can beat so that you can get used to winning again. Manage championship level fighters like they're championship level fighters who need to be rebuilt and protected and all that. So I hope Reyes does not get a title shot coming into this. I mean, they're going to do Ankalaev, I think, Pereira next. I would be actually pretty shocked if they don't do that. And I don't know. Otherwise, I mean, everybody else in the top 5 is coming off a loss, so who knows how everything will shake out after that. Anyway, yeah, Smith, retire. Reyes, Ulberg, or Krylov, or Mirzakhanov, whatever it is. That brings us to a welterweight fight: Vicente Luque, Themba Gorimbo, and nothing personal against Themba Gorimbo, but I feel very validated by this fight. I picked Luque going in. I felt sketchy about that pick because obviously we're all like a little bit gun shy on Luque since his brain bleed, and since he's looked very hurtable in recent fights. He's looked a little slower, looked a little more fragile. He's taken, it seems like his cage wear seems to be hitting him really early in his life because of how brutal and long his career has already been. He's only 33, but he's been fighting for 15 years and through, 34 fights, and most of them in the UFC. And at the same time, I absolutely hate Themba Gorimbo's game, and he's not good. He throws his face at people, which is what got him chin checked brutally here. He's the kind of fighter who strikes with both hands out and his face forward as he goes. And then he lives on a wrestling game that is not technical at all and actually struggles to get people down so much as he does just tie them up and make them have the suckiest fight imaginable. So I thought even a slightly shop-worn version of Luque is not that shop-worn that should lose him this fight. So to see him go out there and just crush Gorimbo, hit him with the club and sub, that made me all kinds of happy. Afterward, of course, he called out, said he wanted a top 10 fight, which he is ranked well enough to get, and which I am not necessarily all that happy about that ranking, but he could make an argument for it. And then he called out Jorge Masvidal, which I absolutely have no interest whatsoever in seeing Masvidal fight again at all. But I would begrudgingly accept it as if he's willing to take that fight and the UFC is automatic on booking Masvidal and they're not treating him like they're treating Donald Cerrone, where Dana White basically just like said, I hate the idea of Donald Cerrone fighting again. If they're booking Masvidal, then yeah, Luque's fine. Otherwise, you could do Luque versus I don't know. You could do Luque Prates. Honestly, I know that's vicious and horrible and only good for me and my boy. But somebody else mentioning Luque versus MVP. I would like that, but MVP appears to have moved up to middleweight, I believe, for his next bout. So I am kind of thinking that is, given how big Page is, I don't know that. He's fighting Shah Magomedov in 2025 next year in February. So I kind of think that might be the end of Page at welterweight. He's 37, and if he's moving up now as a 6'3" welterweight, I don't think he's going back down. All right. On that note, that gets us to a featherweight bout: Movsar Evloev, Aljamain Sterling. I love this fight. This was the best, most perfect version of this fight it could have possibly been. Sterling got a chance to show that he is actually, in a lot of ways, a better striker than Evloev. a much more committed striker, a much more confident striker. He did get a kick caught and got clubbed at one point. But, there's a reason Sterling was champ. And he showed up and he showed that in this fight. But he could not stop himself from scrambling with Evloev and from trying to take the fight with scrambling. And god damn, if he had not jumped for that back take in round 3, he would have won this fight. And it was just, that was a brutal mistake from Sterling. I really do believe he would have won it right there. But he jumped, instead of just continuing to roll with Evloev and try to stay on top of him in the scramble, he tried to go for the big moment, the big move, and it collapsed the fight for him. But yeah, otherwise I felt like this was sort of a y'all must have forgot fight for Sterling, where a lot of people came in and they're like, oh, Evilev's just going to take him apart. Cormier had one of his, or no, I think it might have been Cormier or Rogan both. I'm trying to remember if it was Cormier or Rogan. I'm going to say Cormier because that was the first thing that came to my mind. One of his glaringly stupid moments in this fight. Yeah, it was. It was DC. Where he talked about, is like, Sterling came in and he looked big. He looked bigger than than Calvin Kattar in their fight, but Evloev looks bigger than Sterling. And it's just like, Calvin Kattar is 5'11". He's 4 inches taller than both of these guys. Sterling and Evloev are the same size, and they fought like guys that are the same size. They had a great back and forth scrambling fight that it was two tiny little muscly grapplers. And so, yeah, this was just a great fight. Somebody asked about how I think Evloev does against Topuria. And I think we saw the core problem of Evloev's game that I think is going to be a problem against Topuria. And that was a reason I picked Sterling going into this fight. It is a reason that I am always going to have questions about Evloev as a top tier bantamweight, which is that his striking is really geared towards the pocket. It is geared for him to fall into the pocket and to clinch and grapple from there and to wrestle from there. And he's very hittable as he does that. And I just don't think I think that's too big a problem to have against somebody who hits like Topuria does. So I gotta pick Topuria going into that. Evloev has the wrestling game that if he can pressure Topuria and get Topuria on the defensive and get him wrestling, just do that constantly, yeah, maybe he can make something happen, but I have to pick Topuria. And I have to assume that Evloev should get the next title shot. If Dana White doesn't give him that just sucks. He deserves it. Looking at that featherweight division, Volkanovski, Holloway both come out. I mean, the other option, of course, is Topuria Lopez, which I'd also be happy to see Lopez get the title shot. And if Topuria doesn't want to fight right away, I would love to see Lopez versus Evloev too. But Topuria has 2 clear title fights in front of him right now. It could be Lopez, it could be Evloev. If Evloev doesn't get the title shot, somebody talking about him, Emmett Rodriguez, I could see one of them. I could see that. Emmett's coming off a win, so you could do Emmett versus Evloev. You could also do Volkanovski versus Evloev if Volkanovski is going to stick around at featherweight. I think it sounds like Holloway is going up to lightweight for a while. But you could do Volkanovski Evloev if the UFC wants to punish Evloev and if Volkanovski wants to stay as a top contender. I would love to see that. Otherwise, yeah, somebody mentioning people calling this a robbery. I'm surprised anybody that Sterling has enough fans to get that kind of reaction, but B, no, it wasn't. Sterling, he had moments, he was competitive, he was in position to win this fight, and he lost it. And that's all there is to it. This is a fight that Evloev took late off a bad decision by Sterling. I had no problem with that. All right, that brings us to a catchweight bout. Brian battle Randy Brown. And yeah, this was a battle. You know, you could say maybe the weight played a difference in this fight. I'm not sure about that. I honestly think that Battle always has, when he chooses to use it, because he started out fighting terribly in this fight. Battle came out and he looked like he had no idea what he wanted to do. He talked about being surprised that Randy Brown clinched up with him at all, but both men were pushing for that clinch. And Brown, if you watch his old fights, especially, Brown is at his best as a clinch fighter. That's been where he is his most technical. So that should have been something Battle was prepared for. But either way, he looked like he wasn't prepared for Brown early in this fight. And apparently his game plan was to strike with him from distance, which he was losing that fight handily early. It's a terrible fight for Battle to try to win against Randy Brown. It's just bad plan all over. When Battle pushed forward and when he got convinced to push forward, then he was able to slow Brown down and grind on him and do good work. Brown has a lot of trouble getting backed up. And that was, that was evident. Every time Battle pushed forward, he won. Every time he took a step back, he lost. So this should teach him something. It is concerning that afterward, they're like, oh, what happened with your weight cut in Battle? Is like, oh, I just made some mistakes. It's like, you missed by 4 pounds. What? Did you just not have a diet? What are you doing out there? He is, for a 6'1" guy, he is very big in his torso, just a huge upper body. So he could go to middleweight. I wouldn't be at all surprised if UFC forces it. I also wouldn't be surprised if they just let it go. I don't know. I don't think that they, even though he's missed twice now, I'm not at all sure that they care enough to push him up a division. We'll see, but I kind of expect to see him back at 170. He just needs to learn that his game is best served going forward. He's not some insanely crafty range striker technician. He's a good trigger counter fighter, and he does his best work pushing forward. Like the suggestion in here of Battle against Michael Morales. That'd be a really fun fight. You could also just do like Battle against, I don't know. Let's see who's another fun. You could do Battle against Zaleski or Battle against, let's see, D-Rod. That'd be fun. Battle against, well, I would love to see Battle against Dalby for the big hulking welterweights that fight like grindy middleweights. I would do Battle versus Dalby, even though that's maybe unfair to my 40-year-old boy. But anyway, not a thriller, but I'm not surprised Battle ground out that win. That brings us to a catchweight bout: Eric Anders, Chris Weidman. And yeah, the UFC needs to stop booking Chris Weidman. He almost beat Eric Anders. He had a moment there, but it's also clear like he got out wrestled by Eric Anders. He got out grappled by Eric Anders. When he dropped Eric Anders off that left hook, he went for like 2 or 3 strikes on the ground, and you could see him immediately fatigue. And there's just nothing left in that tank. So I know he owns, like, he's in partnership with Sarah Weidman or with Sarah Longo now. He has a Weidman Longo branch of the school. He has his own branch, so he's got his own stuff going on. And yeah, he was doing. He complained about stuff. He was doing nothing for 3 minutes on his back, getting beat up before that stoppage. So totally fine with the stoppage. Don't need to see him fight anymore, and don't care who Eric Andrews fights anymore. Good for Eric Andrews. He doesn't care either. He's just out there trying to have fun, get wins, get to 20 fights, and retire himself. So yeah, I'm just glad that fight. I'm glad Weidman was still conscious to complain about that fight. That's what I'll say. That brings us to a flyweight fight. Joshua Van, Cody Durden. And this was my sadness hedge fight of the card. I picked Cody Durden thinking he could go out there, punish Van early the way everybody else does. I don't like how quickly Van has been taking these fights since he got knocked out by Charles Johnson. I don't think it's giving him a chance to develop his game at all. Yada, yada, yada. All this stuff. I had all these worries. I didn't like this fight for Van. And he showed the fuck up. He had a great fight. I will say, in part, I think Durden screwed himself by grappling and wrestling so desperately early in this fight. I realized Van's boxing. Van made it clear later why Durden was right to be scared about Van's boxing. But Van doesn't sit down on a lot, and he doesn't throw a lot early in fights. He pressures a lot and tries to figure out what the timing of his opponent and tries to build a tempo for himself by pressuring early without a lot of volume and stinging shots. And it's what gets him hurt a lot. And he often gets hurt early in fights. So Durden, he had the chance early to go after Van, take advantage of that, and try to run out to a lead that he could later sit on. But he chose to just let Van ride through that first round pretty damage-free. And I think that gave Van exactly what he needed to just jumpstart his offense in the second round and just start running away with this fight. So great fight for Van. When he is clicking, man, he is so much goddamn fun. He puts his combinations together so well. Love how he targets the body. Love his pressure. Love his insistence on pressuring and slip countering. His ability to go forward, draw himself back, and lunge right back in the pocket. Just when Van's game works, it is a joy to watch. So I couldn't be happier he got this win. I hedged against it. It was a foolish pick. I love Van's game way better than Durden's, but I also just thought that this might have been a trap fight for him. So I'm glad it wasn't. Could set him up for potentially a step up into the rankings for a fight with somebody like Bruno Silva. Although Bruno Silva's fighting Manel Kopp. Weird fight to book. But could do Joshua Van, Tim Elliott, or could do a Charles Johnson rematch. But if you're Charles Johnson, I would not pick out that fight. Somebody asked me what I think Van needs to do to start less cold in the first round of fights. I think he just, A, needs to feint more, and B, needs to sit on his jab more, probably. He can also just try to find ways to build safe volume early without such insistent pressure. Like, let himself get the rhythm and do things that let him feel like and find a rhythm without pushing so far into the pocket so fast. Because when he turns it up later, it's perfect and it's great. But he needs to, there needs to be a measure where he just has a little bit more understanding that his first round needs to be a process where he learns but doesn't put himself in danger, where he doesn't get hurt, So that would be my feeling. But really, it's a problem for a coach to solve. I'm just blue skying that. And maybe, obviously he's not that kind of fighter, but it could also just be like maybe wrestle more, because getting wrestled didn't bother him, but like go out and shoot some takedowns, push somebody back that way early. Just, do other things than I am going to stand in front of you and try to figure out whether or not you're going to punch me and setting up 5 punch combinations. So anyway, I really shouldn't be giving that kind of advice. I'm not suited to it. That brings us to a welterweight bout. Well, I was also thinking, is there another flyweight bout in that division? Just for the sake of a flyweight bout that isn't a ranked fight, because I don't know if any of the ranked fights really make sense for him. Durden he's the right kind of borderline top 15 fighter to make that jump. But yeah, maybe like Andre Lima would also be really fun, or Jesus Aguilar. Just, there are some fun fighters in that division for him to make something happen against. Yeah, somebody asking, what about Sumu Darji? You could do Sumu Darji. Yeah, I wouldn't be against that. Basically, any Joshua Van fight, I'm just gonna say yes. All right, that brings us to a welterweight bout: Michael Chiesa, Max Griffin. Somebody saying Matt Schnell retired, but I'm really glad to have been right about this fight too. Chiesa looked pretty good. He still has that striking that he's always had, the put your head down and just kind of swing it overhand and pray it lands. But Griffin has never been a fighter to find and follow an easy path to victory, and Chiesa often is. Chiesa is a fighter who, you go back over his record, you basically have to out-grapple Michael Chiesa to beat him. He will force grappling upon you. He forced it on Max Griffin, and he got a great rear naked choke. Awesome fight, awesome submission from him. 2 old dudes battling it out, well booked. I was happy to see it, so I was just a solid bout. I don't know that I have any fight I necessarily care about him being in next. You could do, somebody like Court McGee or something. I don't know. But, yeah, just as long as Chiesa's out there, he wants to chase the rear naked choke record. That's cool. Have him fight Jake Matthews or something. Somebody recommending Gilbert Burns, I guess. Or, yeah, you could do, maybe be a little cruel, maybe. But you could do Chiesa versus like Salikov, or, yeah, anything like that. Put him in some old man fights. All right. That brings us to a lightweight bout: Chase Hooper, Clay Guida. As expected, an old man execution. It's the fight 5 years ago would have been poisoned for Clay Guida, and it still was now. I don't know. A lot of people came to me saying like, "Oh my God, Chase Hooper is so improved," because he went out there and like clubbed Clay Guida a couple times, and he is better. I'm not going to say he's not, but he also got clubbed by Clay Guida a couple times. Like, this is one of Clay Guida's best punching performances since, like, I don't know. Jesus. You have to go back a long way for the last time that it felt like Clay Guida like hit somebody really hard and clean. Somebody saying Guida clubs everybody, if only briefly. That clubbing Guida that came out of his Team Alpha Male time, haven't seen that in a few years. I feel like this was one of the few returns of it. So this was better for Chase Hooper, but this was also a fight that Clay Guida would have lost at any point in Clay Guida's career. This kind of venomous grappler who is a really good opportunist has always been toxic for Clay Guida. And any version of post-prime Guida, I would have picked to lose a fight like this. So, solid. The fight, the call out he made afterward, Chase Hooper calling out Jim Miller, that's trash call out. I don't need to see Chase Hooper go on some old man tour of the lightweight division. Put him in there with I don't know. Let's see. Put him in there with Nasrat Haqparast or Ludovic Klein or Alex Hernandez. Or I would love, he would never do this and it would make no sense to him. But at some point, I would actually love to see Chase Hooper versus Paddy Pimblett. Paddy Pimblett would not accept that fight, but, maybe even Ignacio Bahamondes I'd be interested in. I don't need to see Chase Hooper versus Jim Miller. Yeah, sure. Somebody saying Hooper versus Robisky. So I got nothing. I got nothing against Chase Hooper's Gen Z cred. Sure, he's got a little bit of the Ian Gary annoying online kid thing, but it's not nearly as bad as that. It's just him wanting to do any fighter his age. He's 25. He's in the core years of his career. Any fighter like that wanting to do an old man tour, I'm not into it. I just don't like it. All right. That brings me to a heavyweight bout. Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Łukasz Brzeski. And no surprises here. Nzechukwu is just better. I'm still not 100% sure that he's a heavyweight. Not in body, he's clearly big enough and strong enough and powerful enough and technical enough to be a heavyweight. But I just need to see him. This was a good step for him. He fought much more confidently. I just need to see a lot more of that. Need to see a lot more of Nzechukwu playing the bull and going out there and not calling people sir and putting it on people and being a big heavyweight, fighting like a big guy who's bigger than everybody. And yeah, so this was a good performance from him in a fight that he was going to win no matter what. Somebody saying he could fight one of the Tafas, but he's already kind of even this Brzeski fight was kind of a weird step back. He really should be fighting more bottom of the top 15. Who is ranked in heavyweight in the top 15? Let's see. Go Gaziev's booked, but Parkin, Cortez Acosta, Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Those are the kind of fights that I would like to see him in. So anyway, I'm going to wrap things up. Overall, we don't have any bonus content tonight, but you can find me on Twitter at the Zane Simon, on Blue Sky, just at Zane Simon, on Substack at zanesimon.substack.com. You can subscribe and help the show out in the comments. There's a link there. Help us keep going. We appreciate all the support we can get. And if I had we don't have any bonus content tonight because I'm alone, but if I had a score to give the card overall, I would give this a 3 as a pay-per-view. The main event was solid. It was it was booked without interest, and unfortunately all the fights that should have been cool to deliver on the main card didn't. So that's it. All right. Anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Adios.